chapter 5, and my lighting is terrible, but it's okay. I don't. My camera is a little far away. Too lazy to get it, but it'll be fixed for next time. Um. Anyways, yeah, chapter 5 of 1984. It's been a while since I recorded. I read the chapter a while ago. It's just didn't come around to recording and didn't really know how to start this one. Um, we're introduced to some new characters, unless I forgot that they've been introduced previously. That, like, that guy named Mr. I think Parsons. Mr. Parsons. Can't remember if it was his family that was being spoken about before. I think in chapter 3. Chapter 3 or 2. When the boys were acting like spies. Can't remember if it was him, but I don't think so because it mentioned him having a daughter in this chapter. And it might be a new character. Can't really remember, but I'll go check and read back again later on to find out if they're introducing more or I'm just forgetting, being forgetful. Anyways, yeah, this chapter starts with Winston in the canteen. I got some notes right in front of me. So, Winston's in the canteen, and his friend slash comrade, because they're not really actually friends, approaches him. And this guy's a Newspeak specialist. Think he's like in charge of like updating Newspeak, and he's like going on a rant about, not a rant, but he's just going on a tangent about how they're in charge of making the language smaller rather than bigger, and how it's such a special thing, and how it's so like innovative. And this guy has a couple screws loose, to say the least. He's a little weird. He's acting as if he knows why Winston didn't go to the hanging in previous chapter that the kids were excited to go to for some reason, and tells Winston that he wishes the prisoners weren't tied up so he could see them dangle and suffer. So this guy's a little bit of like a sadist, because he wants to see people suffering, but um in relation to like most other people in this world, it's pretty normal, especially the younger generation, because they've all shown signs of being like psychopaths or crazy, completely brainwashed by Big Brother. So I'm not sure if this guy's like a product of the time, or if he's just like adopted the views and that mindset that he wants to see any prisoners, or like, what's the word? It starts with a D. Not deterrents, but dissenters. He wants to see any dissenters like being punished that cruelly. And by like person of the time, I mean like the youth, how they grew up in that. Because I don't think it says how old this guy is, but so I'm not sure if he's like new to it, or he just fully embraced the principles of Ingsoc. And yeah, he goes on a tangent about Newspeak and how it shrinks, and that 100 years from now people wouldn't even understand their conversation. And basically this guy named Syme, he explains how the goal is that in due time thought crime will be impossible, and that orthodoxy is not, well, and that orthodoxy will be the concept of, or like just not thinking slash unconsciousness, like as they said in the last chapter, duck speak, just babbling the propaganda and the principles of Ingsoc. And I mean, I assume they're probably gonna get there by the end of the story. Like, even though Winston is like uh the center, right? Even though he's against all these things, as of right now, and I know it's not even like getting into like the rising action of the show yet. Even though it's still the beginning, or not the show, the book. Even though it's still the beginning, I don't see a way of him to gain enough power or enough of a following to like take down Big Brother, like he wrote in his notebook, "Down with Big Brother." I'm from now predicting that he's gonna fail, which I mean, I think it's happening. I haven't heard anything about the end of the book. I've just heard about how the book reflects society nowadays, but I don't know anything about, like, no spoilers or no nothing. I haven't heard nothing. Anyways, back on track. Winston theorizes that Syme will be vaporized in the future. Because even though Syme is like a big proponent of Big Brother, he says that he's too smart for his own good. Winston says it's like written on the guy's face that he's going to be vaporized, just erased, like Winston's family was in the past, and how Winston later on he makes like a bunch of prediction about who he thinks is going to be vaporized. But yeah, because even though Syme is Syme, is it Syme? I don't know. I'm just gonna say Syme. But even though Syme's like very, very for Big Brother, the things that he says, like the way he says things, is kind of like breaking the fourth wall, as if he's not supposed to know the information, or he says things in a way that makes it seem like he's on to Big Brother, and it's only a matter of time before he like switches sides completely. So to be safe, Big Brother is going to deal with him when that time comes, or before it even gets a chance of popping up. Yeah, so like even though Syme's a dedicated follower, there's something about him that makes Winston think that he's going to be vaporized. Like, Syme says that duck speak is like both a good thing and a bad thing depending on who you're talking about it, depending on who you're referring to, and that's like he's like the first character other than Winston to realize these things, like realize the control that they're under. Yeah, so he realizes that duck speak has contradicting meanings depending on who it's used towards. If it's used towards your enemies, that means that they're babbling the basically they're kind of like in a Goldstein type of situation where they're gonna be like hated, and they're gonna be like the victim of like the 2 minutes of hate one day, or the target, I mean, not the victim, something like that. But if you're talking about someone who supports Big Brother, supports Ingsoc, then it's a good thing because they know all like the proper talking points. They know how to I guess not drop any suspicion. Not that they would be suspicious anyways, because if they're duck speaking, that means they're not thinking about it. And they actually do support Big Brother in that type of way. And yeah, Syme has too much knowledge for his own good. And another thing they point out is that he goes to the Chestnut Tree Cafe, which is not a bad thing according to the narrator, or I guess it's Winston. It's not a bad thing that he goes to the Chestnut Tree Cafe, but it is where the previous political leaders gathers. So this is, I guess, before Ingsoc was established and took power. So it mentions in particular Goldstein. Goldstein used to go to the Chestnut Tree Cafe. So even though it's not illegal to go there, I guess it's a little bit suspicious, because I guess it reminds me of how they said in like the times of like the Enlightenment, like right before the Renaissance or around that time, going out of the Dark Ages, when people started to drink more coffee rather than alcohol all the time, because like the water wasn't clean enough to drink back then. People started drinking coffee and going to like coffee houses, and it'd be like the meeting places of the intellectuals who would discuss like new societal philosophical political ideas, all that type of stuff. Like in like 500 years ago, that's where people went to discuss those type of things. So that's what it reminded me of. Like when he goes to the Chestnut Tree Cafe, it's like he's discussing things that could, in some ways, incite revolt against Ingsoc. Moving on. Parsons, the guy who I'm not sure if is a new character, but I'm just going to go with that. Parsons, a new character who's introduced, seems to be, based on his description given in the book, a bubbling, sweaty giant of a man and the opposite of Syme in some ways, but not always. So Syme's sharp and zealous in his love for Big Brother, while Parsons is more laid back and just goes with the flow of what Big Brother says. So he's not like a avid supporter, but he's more like he just doesn't question anything, so he's just gonna go with it. And in that way, they're similar, but they're distinct because they like same result, different way of getting to that result. And Parsons tells a story to give a little insight. He seems also like in support of Big Brother in this way, that he's like proud of his daughters for doing this. He tells a story of how his daughters, while they were on a little hike in the mountains or something, saw this guy who was suspicious and ended up following him, concluding that he was a spy from either Eurasia or West Asia. Is it East Asia? I can't remember. One of the other Asias. He was a spy from there, and this was known based on his shoes that he was wearing, because it wasn't something that was produced in Oceania. And then she reports him because I guess he was a spy. Well, it doesn't say whether or not he actually was, but that was her reasoning. And I guess it wasn't really relevant whether he was actually a spy or not. It was just the point that the daughter, who was quite young, is already starting in these behaviors that are quite pro Big Brother, anti-freedom. And it's like what's praised in their Oceanic, whatever it's called, society. And yeah, anyways, Parsons seems pretty proud of his daughter for doing that, which I guess the standards are different for kids. Like, people want their kids to be like, she's on her way to becoming like a thought police. I think so. Either way, yeah, despite Simon Parsons being quite opposites, Winston noted how they both take what Big Brother says in regards to the chocolate rations at face value. And this kind of relates back to what I was just saying before, that little story. So they're similar but different, and in the way that they're seemingly opposites but the same, it's shown in this example of when they made an announcement that, like, Big Brother made an announcement that the chocolate rations was increased to 20 grams, and the week prior it was said that it would have to be reduced to 20 grams, right? And it's impossible that it would be both increased and reduced to the same amount, right? But they both are like just taking it. Simon because he's so fervently for Big Brother, and Parsons because he just doesn't think about what is really said. He's just like, oh yeah, that happened. Oh yeah, sure, that is what happened then. If that's what they said, yeah. Neither of them questioned it, and then this, even though Parsons is Winston's friend, and then Simon his colleague slash acquaintance or whatever, comrade, he realizes that he's kind of like by himself. It seemed like he was getting a little bit of hope in the situation, but then he realized he was by himself, and that he's the only one that didn't question, who did question the fake news. Yeah, so the book then transitions to Winston realizing he's not as similar as he thought to the other two guys. And kind of like going back to what the previous chapter, or not I can't remember at this point, but the one about like the memory holes, right? Kind of like referring back to that in the same way, or not in the same way. Though he questions the rations announcement made by the Ministry of Plenty, he doesn't remember much of like what it actually was. He's like, oh, this is wrong. But I mean, he doesn't remember much else. So like, he knows it's wrong, but he can't remember like anything else that it might be, or what they previously said before that. Yeah. And Winston is unsatisfied with all the things in the canteen. Like, the food is terrible. He says the clothes are terrible. And they always have holes. But it's like he remembers it being better, but he doesn't remember how it actually was. It's just like how everything in the canteen feels wrong. And that's kind of like what he doesn't remember much else of. Everything feels wrong, but he can't like put his finger on it. It just feels as if there was a time when everything was better, but he can't remember what it was or when that was ever the case. Yeah. And he then takes some time to remember Mrs. Parsons and her kids and thinks how it's so sad that in a couple of years she's probably going to be turned in by her own children and vaporized, right? And he makes many predictions, like I said before, about who will be vaporized. He says himself, Mrs. Parsons, O'Brien, I think that's who I'm mistaking Parsons for, maybe, and Syme. But he says Mr. Parsons won't be because he's not sharp enough and doesn't embody, like, the negative duck speak only embodies like the first original like positive version, at least positive for Big Brother. And he's too orthodox or unconscious to like, or stupid really, to be vaporized by Big Brother because he's really no threat. He's no threat to their power. So they'll have no reason to really get rid of him. I guess he's more like a tool for their propaganda. At this point, though, they don't even need propaganda because everyone's already, or most people are already under their control, and they seem to very quickly get rid of everyone who is not under their control. And then Winston notices a girl. This is a little bit like unrelated. This is how the chapter ends. Winston notices a girl with dark hair at another table, and she keeps staring at him, and he thinks it's the same girl from the 2 Minutes of Hate, who is like sitting right behind him, who chose to sit right behind him. But this time he can't remember whether she sat down at that table before he went to his table in the canteen or the other way around. And then he starts to suspect her as a spy. And then I think they're gonna like go a little bit more into who this girl is, because first she was at the 2 Minutes Hate, now she's in the canteen. Maybe she's following him around. I guess maybe she could be a spy. Maybe they're on to Winston a little bit. And he doesn't know whether or not she's an agent of the Thought Police, but that's what scares him the most. And she also sat right behind him. And this is basically Winston's prediction that she was basically tasked with seeing if he was like screaming, or not screaming, but chanting loud enough during the anti-Goldstein hate 2 minutes, whatever that thing. That's such a weird name, the 2 Minutes of Hate. And I'm surprised hate's even a word in Newspeak, because then they could easily use that to express their sentiment towards Big Brother. I'm pretty sure they would not want that. But anyways, yeah, he worries he's going to be found guilty, and guilty of a face crime, because he's during the victory announcements. And basically, similar to a thought crime, there's face crimes, and face crimes, well, this is absurd, but in the same way that she was like observing him during the 2 Minutes Hate, he could be, I guess, prosecuted, executed, maybe even vaporized if, one, he's not enthusiastic enough in, I guess, knocking Goldstein down a peg or two during the hate, if he seems like he doesn't want to be there, because his facial expression expresses that he's not all for what they're chanting, right? Which means that he's anti-Big Brother. And Man, that's scary. Like thought crime is one thing, right? Like I guess in some ways, even nowadays, it could be demonized, not really criminalized, but demonized for having thoughts different to the mainstream. But for a facial expression, like imagine someone said, let's just say, let's just say the duck is the president, for the sake of duck speak, right? There's a duck president. And someone said, oh, wow, I love the duck. And you're like, then you can get arrested for that if you're not like, woohoo, go duck. That's crazy. Anyways, that's how this chapter ends. And I took a little peek at the next one. And it's like a letter that he's writing, but I didn't read the letter. I just saw that he was writing a letter. It's a shorter chapter, so that's probably going to be a shorter video. But yeah, um, that's really scary. I hope they like go more into like the the aspect of Winston having to like sneak around as so that he's not like caught having the wrong facial expression at the wrong time to get arrested. That would be, I mean, I would not want to live in such a world. Anyways, um yeah, that's about it for this chapter. Don't know when the next one's going to come out. Busy in the upcoming weeks, but next is going to be the Beggar's Pardon, chapter 2. Then we'll see how it goes from there.